lunch. So we'll keep it moving along. This is going to be totally dependent on you guys to ask some questions, so be ready. Let me start by saying you're in the Windows 10 and its impact on the media ecosystem. And what we're going to really be talking about today is modern media apps in general, both the client side and the cloud. We'll introduce everybody that's up here in a minute, but very quickly, would very much like to get a sense of who's in the room. Do we have app developers that are here? Yes, app developers. What about content publishers? Nope. Yet also that, a couple of those. So I guess maybe just the table here in the front. Who are you guys? What are you here for today? So infrastructure. Gotcha. Are there other infrastructure people who are attending as well? Yep. Okay. So a fairly light mix. So feel free to ask questions as they come along. So my name is Andy Beach. I'm a program manager and technical evangelist with Microsoft. I specifically work on our consumer apps ecosystem, which is sort of the non-enterprise side of the world. So obviously media apps fall squarely into that land. And that gives me the ability to work with a bunch of great people, and some of them have even agreed to join me here today. And I hope they still call me a friend after all of this. We'll start here. Chris, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little about what you do?
Yeah, is this thing? Yeah. My name is Chris Poe. I am the former VP of Technology at Machinima.
I got it in there.
Yeah, cool. Currently just a tech guy at large. Worked with Andy and team on launching our Xbox One app. We were a launch partner with them, and we also have an Xbox 360 app and various Windows apps. 20 years in the LA tech scene.
Can you tell us a little bit about Machinima and what the types of content you produce, just so we have context?
Yeah, sure. Machinima is a network of content producers focused around the gaming industry, and it is a pretty broad spectrum. It's not just gamers now. They're doing a lot of sort of, I don't know, fanboy type stuff. So a lot of television brands that we're talking about, but there's gameplay, there's news, there's a pretty broad scope there.
Cool, excellent. Caleb, maybe introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Caleb Fletcher. I work for UI-Centric. I know some of you people here know us. We're a multi-platform development agency. We've got quite a significant investment in Microsoft and Windows. We've been working with you guys for quite a while now.
Thank you for your support.
Yep, launch partners on Windows Phone, Windows 8.
And you obviously work in other areas as well, and you don't focus on just media apps, although I've noticed your portfolio has a pretty large amount of...
Yeah, pretty strong. So we, I mean, some of the recent ones are CBS, BBC, Discovery Channel, AMC.
Excellent. Next to you, we've got Vlad. Vlad, introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Vlad Geller. I work for a company called Ensemble Systems. We're based in Vancouver, Canada, and like my colleague Caleb, we do very similar things, I would say. We have a practice, a portion of our practice that's focused around doing enterprise solution development, and another half of our practice which is around building applications or apps for media companies. We're multi-platform. We forged a very strong relationship with Microsoft probably for the last 5 years or so, I would say. Xbox 360, Xbox One, tablet, Windows Phone, pretty much all of the above. We're building apps for, and then also doing Android, iOS, and the rest.
And what are some of the examples? And I believe you've had the FX and Fox that have recently launched a couple of updates. What are some of the other titles that...
Sure. So A&E Networks, there's 3 or 4 brands in our A&E Networks that we've worked with. Viacom, I think 6 or 7 brands that we've launched with Viacom. Warner Brothers, and Fox, and there's a few brands under Fox, including Nat Geo, which they run the Nat Geo channel brand as well. So some good examples there.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Ed?
Hi, my name's Ed Festa. Work for NBCU in their Digital Enterprises group. more specifically product and distribution for CISO, the new SVOD channel that we'll be launching in the next couple months, rolling out onto a bunch of platforms, one of which, of course, is Windows 10. Prior to that, I was at Crackle for years as well, so worked with the Windows team there for quite a while as well before that.
Yeah, everybody always thought it was funny that there was such a strong connection in Crackle, but it was such a big brand such a popular app on all of the platforms.
Yeah, it's like the easy advantage there, of course, was all the content was free to the end user, and so it was nice. It wasn't the hardest sales pitch to you guys to be like, can we get on the box? But yes, it's a Crackle, and Microsoft enjoyed a great partnership for years.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent. So as you can see, we've got a mix of sort of the publishing side of the house and the developers as we sort of talk through things. So to sort of kick this off, I wanted to talk about, I'd used this in the opening, talked about a modern media app. And I obviously have some pretty distinct ideas around that and want to get some thoughts around that. But I'll just sort of lay out that, and I'd said this to a couple of you, but I feel like up until, I'd say the last year or so, a lot of the apps, and unfortunately even still now, some of the apps that we're seeing are really just a catalog of content, and that's really all it is. It's a brochure, then I'm going to sit down and use it. And that's indicative of what it grew out of. I mean, obviously, a TV is even a dumber pipe than that, if you will. But there's not been a ton of advancement. We've been so focused on operationally getting the video to play better, start faster, have better quality of experience, that we've yet to focus on the features that broaden it and make it a smarter application. And I think we're to that point now where that can start happening. And I really see it falling down on two sides of the table. The client, obviously, super important there, but there's a lot of things in the cloud that we can do to automate and make these apps smarter. I'll jump to sort of one example just to talk about where that's going in the Microsoft world, and then we'll open it up and start talking. One of the things I should start with is that in one of the Microsoft philosophies that was announced last year with Windows 10 is this notion of a universal Windows platform. So the idea is that you'll be able to write the application once and deploy to all the devices that support Windows 10. So in years past, as all the developers know, we've had different ADKs and SDKs for each device that we had, and that was pretty challenging as you went into the ecosystem. Saying that you worked with Microsoft, you had to be more specific than that as to what you were doing and where you were doing it. And that's really changing. And fundamentally, it's happening now. We've yet to deliver fully on the promise, but we've announced that promise, and it started rolling out with the desktop, and it's coming soon with the phone, and it'll be there next year with the Xbox as well. So the first piece of it is that notion of just making it simpler to get the apps out there onto all the devices and have the experience. The two areas that I have seen that I feel like are really important and underutilized, particularly by the media apps today, Cortana is first example, and that's the Siri-like capabilities of being able to talk to your device, whether it's your desktop, your Xbox, and have it actionable, have something that's there. So rather than just play and pause and do other things, actually being able to talk to it. And it's fairly natural language because this is cloud-based contextual processing that it's doing. It's not trying to just use the processor on the device to make decisions. So you actually have the ability to do things like play the newest episode of New Girl, or find me a movie that has Vin Diesel in it, and it can present those results to you, and again make them actionable. So that's definitely an area that I think very quickly I hope to start seeing the apps take advantage of. Chris, is that a feature you think is compelling, or are there others that you think are equally important?
No, certainly. That's a huge one for us. At Machinima, one of the things that we benefited from, or one of the paradigms, I guess, that we tried to carry over into different platforms is really the notion of content creator loyalty, and having Cortana be like an agent for you to sort of help with discovery, or remind you to watch, or maybe even retrieve media for you, or whatever. And I think that's a huge aspect of it. And also with the notification functionality. I think giving you an in-place opportunity to engage with the community and maybe even the creator himself or herself, I think that's a really compelling thing. So the integration with the OS at that level, I think is really cool.
And the piece Chris is referring to is the sort of the second component that I had called out, which is called the Action Center. And the Action Center is this bar that now swipes out from the right-hand side of the screen, and it's globally all the notifications that have come in regarding the apps, and they get sorted out by app, and they can actually be actionable within that area. So the developers can have ways to not just notify you when you've got something, you could actually start it playing from there, or without ever launching the app, you could do things like add it to your queue or remind you to watch it. So you're making actionable events very accessible to the end user and very rapid. Ed, on the, sort of on that topic of sort of the end user experience and making things sort of faster, discoverable, and actionable, are those the types of features that you're looking for in integrating in your products?
Yeah, I mean, without question. I think from the content publisher perspective, we want to create as few barriers as possible between the user and what they want to watch. And so it's almost, borrowing a line that we've all heard from the ad world. It's the perfect ad is, one that reaches the right user in the right context at the right time, and so on. We almost want to do the same thing, I think, with content delivery. And features like these aid in that. It again sort of shortens the distance between the user and exactly what they want to watch. So features like these that are native to the experience in Win 10 are only going to help us do that. No question about it. And it's like, and we're experimenting, or we want to experiment with evolving, what you described as sort of the catalog. It's like, I think that's a place where we can be a little innovative as well.
So I was just going to add, the promise of something like Cortana is great, but you have to balance noise to the end user versus the utility that you get out of using that feature. As a user myself, forget about me being in the technology space, I'm that guy that doesn't like noise at all. I know what I want to do, and I'm going to do it the way I need to. I know that there's a story around giving users access to content as quickly and easily as possible. And certainly users that aren't in the technology space the way we all are here, there has to be that trade-off between the user experience, there has to be that balance, I should say, between the user experience and the noise factor that's involved in leveraging some of this stuff, which I find useful, but I would probably turn it off.
Right, so it has to be highly customizable as well. I have to be able to give the user the controls and the knobs to make that available or not. And yeah, I totally agree. There are definitely times when I want more chatter, particularly like when I'm traveling. I tend to actually turn on some more just because that's the faster way for me to notice things. But then when I'm at my desktop or I'm actually sitting in front of a computer, I don't want a lot of it then.
So don't get me wrong, the ability to have this service there as a developer, it's great. And it's an awesome additional way for our media partners to get their content to users faster. But there is still that discussion that has to happen, again, between that balance.
Yep, I think it makes sense. Caleb, you and I had been talking about just the whole notion of the UWP or Universal Platform. What were your thoughts there? I know you had mentioned a couple things, and I believe my comment was save it for the panel.
So I think the main thing that will resonate with publishers is the ability to write once and deploy everywhere. Xbox is obviously a huge attractive piece for publishers because it's a set-top box. It's widely deployed. I mean, the main thing is that all the pain that you have to go through to integrate things like advertising and analytics and subscription models and Adobe Pass and all that kind of thing, you just do it once. And then you've got it across all the screens. You can customize the UI, which is something that we advocate, doing separate UIs for each form factor. But being able to do it in one place is it's a huge benefit. It's if anything, that's the thing that's going to change the landscape in my view.
I think that makes sense. Chris, in terms of from the publisher perspective, is that right? Once, deploy everywhere. appealing. I've actually heard both sides of it. I've heard a couple publishers who still are sticking to a track just because they have separate development houses or they have separate dev schedules, and right now the features and the functions are different enough that they're not yet willing to integrate, or they're not ready to make that integration move. But is that something you find attractive? Is that?
Yeah, for sure. I think the ubiquity of the content and the ease of access, I think, is a really compelling sort of byproduct of having that, like, write once anywhere, deploy anywhere kind of feature. Again, for speaking for Machinima, one of the big, it's all about sort of high touch and interactivity, right? So being able to watch something on my desktop and then making a comment, leaving, being notified on my phone that like somebody replied to that, it's just being able to engage casually, I guess, but Vlad, his point is really well made. I mean, there's a balance that you have to strike.
Right.
But you know, to your question, yeah, for sure, that's a big deal for us.
I've noticed some of the apps, and particularly because we have so many things now that can notify, one of the features I've seen that I like is in some of the notification areas, one of the buttons that you have is mute for X number of hours. And so I think Periscope was the first one I saw it in, but I've seen it in a couple of apps now where you get a notification and you can go watch it now, or you can just turn off the notifications for the next, 2 hours, 3 hours. And I actually think that's a pretty great, I think that helps with the problem you were talking about.
Yeah.
Ed, on the sort of the UWP side, is that as you're looking at the platforms you want to hit, where, how does that factor into your thinking?
Yeah, I think that we're launching a new brand from scratch, and so I think that for our purposes, especially, and I think this is true regardless of where you are or how long you've been in business. Distribution can be such a great growth driver for you, and so for us, the ability to, with one code base, create, very high quality experiences, across all of these devices is tremendous. And so the ubiquitous distribution piece is critical. And I think also it's giving users, again, sort of like, it helps also with the brand building for us. It's like, to your point, it's like when you say, what does a modern media app mean? It's like it used to be, like you said, it's like you open up a little box and you see a catalog of content. Well, this has all evolved and continues to evolve to be just really a brand. And sort of how you put your brand in front of people, and they sort of associate good things with it and they come to trust it and all the rest is only better served through this ubiquitous universal platform. So yeah, I think it's all to our benefit.
From a development partner's perspective, we get asked that question. I'm sure you guys do as well. At least we have been getting asked that question before Windows 10 around building an app for the Microsoft platform that can be used across the different devices. And you have to sit there and explain the difference between HTML, JavaScript approaches and C# approaches and all that. So a lot of that stuff goes away. Now, you're right, it's kind of rolling out in succession, right? Windows Phone next, Xbox next. So a lot of our media partners, they're really eagerly anticipating the Xbox One support. And that, I think, is the trigger. Yeah, and that's a trigger for a lot of our partners.
I've gotten your emails.
For them to just like, yeah. So you know the story quite well. So a lot of our partners are waiting for that trigger. But I mean, that discussion is so much easier from a developer's perspective now to explain the universal app approach. It just simplifies our lives so much easier.
Caleb, is that, have you had people that are sort of holding out for the Xbox moment, or like where's the balance with your guys right now?
I think it's definitely a driver on adoption.
Yeah.
But also the sheer numbers of Windows 10 desktop reach. It tips that point between.
I believe we're at 110 million is the official number now as of the Surface event that they had in New York.
So it makes the numbers stack up, right? So you're gonna get 110 million on the desktop, the phone, which obviously it's
a couple more.
It's there.
Exactly, but it's just one investment. So, and then the Xbox is a real driver, especially for video.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, and frankly, from Microsoft's perspective as well, I think it helped you guys as well with adoption on the phone product. So I won't say many, but some of our partners did tablet and Xbox, but not phone. So now you have Universal app, and they'll get phone on essentially one effort. I agree that there's some incremental differences there.
Right.
But I think that does open up the market for Microsoft to have a much bigger app ecosystem on the phone, as an example.
Yeah.
Just before we leave UWP, I think another just interesting point is about millennials and post-millennials and how they, as a demographic, consume content. You know, the terms going around called content gorges.
Binge watching?
Yeah, binge watching. And both UWP and the Cortana and the Action Center is all about just getting people into content quickly, wherever they are, whatever device they're on. And I know we talked phone and Xbox and Windows, but then there's other more exotic platforms kind of, you know, on the horizon or on the periphery. And so being
You
able
could say HoloLens if that's what you were thinking.
Sorry?
Just kidding.
I did not say anything with hollow in it. So particularly appealing to those guys because they're driving a lot of publishers' decisions. They're the biggest demographic for them. I think Windows is really going to be a big player in that.
So I think that actually sort of couches nicely with the last point I had, which was the notion of media casting with the apps as well. That's definitely become a bigger driver, and I think that's due in part to sort of the YouTube generation, a bit of having a group of people and wanting to be able to basically throw my video up to a larger screen. And having that natively supported on the Windows 10 platform means that the apps can effectively hook into that feature. And you know, it can actually be done in a couple of ways. I can literally mirror my screen up to there, or I can just use it as basically a remote control to the cloud to trigger the version of the app on that machine to jump to the same point in time. And I think that's actually the more intelligent, like that's the better handoff, because then we're not killing the battery on two devices. And I think that is one that we're going to see a lot more action in the even in the younger crowd in particular, but I think everybody, as we slowly get used to the idea of using it, will use it more and more. And that sort of falls into the Microsoft world. That also goes into the whole notion of continuum, that idea of being able to, continuum is a face, today they talk about it as the notion of, I can plug in my phone and I can now use it as a desktop device, but it also really just means the greater experience of I can switch experiences but continue using the applications, whether it's handing it off to another device or changing the way I'm using this device, like the Surface Book, pulling it out into a tablet mode. Is that, Ed, is media casting, does that play into into what you're working on?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think that there's something very personal about the experience with your app on your phone, on a handheld device, and I think what it does is it deepens the connection between the user and your brand, your app. But with the ability to sort of cast to like a 10-foot lean-back experience right away, it enables, sort of the user again to sort of get to that content in whatever form, they're sort of craving at the time. And it's like we know that sort of content consumption varies by form factor. Some different types of content are more popular depending on, what you're streaming through. And again, with the casting piece, you're just making it that much more seamless. So we're all, it's like our goal with our product as we roll out sort of our app distribution network is to make it as easy as possible for people to get immersed in the content as fast as possible and as conveniently as possible.
Excellent. So, if we sort of move on from the client side of things a little bit and talk about the cloud and the importance here, because I think for any modern app, obviously, I'm not blind. There's other platforms out there. I've had some Kool-Aid and it's delicious, but I haven't had that much Kool-Aid. And so you've got to be able to serve to multiple platforms. And really, if you're going to do that effectively, you're going to have some sort of cloud as part of the infrastructure. I think, obviously, media services has been a place where it was a no-brainer that obviously apps need to take advantage of this, whether it was repackaging of content or quickly transcoding it or even just the distribution networks. But now I think we're moving to a point where there's automation pieces and intelligence that we can put into them that make a difference. I'll sort of start with the publishing side of things first. Chris, what are, from the cloud perspective, thinking with your product hat on, when you think about your cloud play for Machinima, what are the things that you want to be able to offer up to make the app experience better for the end user?
Yeah, it's really the first thing is recommendations. I mean, once you can get a sense for what a given user's watching, and then sort of make recommendations based on what his sort of peer group is doing, what they're watching, what they're liking, also to extend to the other platforms, what are they playing in the context of Machinima. So
maybe you could describe, I know I've had you describe it before, but do you mind describing Wingman for those who may not be familiar with the Machinima platform?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite features. It's really cool. It's super cool.
Thanks. This feature Wingman in the Machinima app is basically So basically, while you're playing a game, you can snap Machinima on the Xbox One, that is, using the presence data, so we can see what you guys are playing, and we can surface walkthrough videos, and just have it riding alongside the game. So if you're stuck, and depending on the telemetry data, and the specificity we get from the game, if we know you've died, and this is a little lofty, but hypothetically, if we knew you were stuck on a particular boss, we could show you the walkthrough video right then, and and it was a hit. I mean, it was a big deal. I thought it was one of the better parts of the app.
Yeah, very cool and super useful.
Yeah,
absolutely. I know I actually took advantage of it.
So
I'm not a gamer, so it's the only way I survive. So
yeah, exactly. Well, you're welcome.
Times. Ed, obviously you have very different content, but from the cloud perspective, is there intelligence or automation components that you're looking at and thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's without question, just echoing what Chris was saying, recommendations are critical. I think that
relevancy is the piece you're looking for, I guess. Right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that from a cloud perspective, scalability is so important. And so we, with our service, we're a little bit different. We're not a content aggregator, so we don't aspire to be, a Netflix or a Hulu, where so much content is there, and then the users, relied upon to find what they want. It's like they're tremendous services, but it can be a little burdensome to get to what you want to watch. And so, for us, it's like we want, again, that time to choice to be as reduced as possible. From a cloud perspective, the recommendations are critical and sort of in getting them there, but then also just the scalability of operations as well helps shorten that gap as well.
Caleb, you and I have been talking, and I know you've had some features that are sort of in a proof of concept stage right now, but maybe you could sort of describe sort of those aspects of it, because they sort of start bridging into the area we call machine learning a little bit, and describe sort of that side of it.
Yeah, so part of the thing that we're really interested in is taking that recommendation one step further, and adapting the entire user experience based on demographics that in machine learning, demographics kind of become a little bit more sparse, but based on what we know about the user, we can give them a different user interface. And again, sorry to keep mentioning it, but there's a huge demographic divide at the moment between millennials, post-millennials, and the rest. And the rest being more interested in exploratory user experiences, and the millennials and post-millennials just content. They don't care where they get it from. They're switching apps continuously. They're doing two things at once. So trying to serve the best user interface based on the user.
And their usage, I guess. Presumably.
Exactly, yeah.
So it'll change over time, effectively?
Well, time of day is a very interesting piece of things. So that's a piece of ambient data that we capture and bring into the equation.
Very cool.
The morning is very different to the evening in terms of people's content watching habits.
Right.
So we think that's an exciting area, and we're building that in Azure, machine learning.
Thank you.
And
I owe you $5.
Yep. Yeah, look out for that one.
Excellent. Vlad, on the sort of the cloud front, what are some of the interesting pieces that you guys are working on at Ensemble?
Sure. So I've always viewed the cloud as being this big brain that you can do things with, process a whole bunch of stuff with. So one of the things we're doing, which is not really media, app, end user related, it's kind of more, I guess it would be upstream from that. So we're using Azure to integrate with for some creative tools. If you guys think of the Adobe Creative Stack, for example, and Premiere Pro being the video editing software they have for that, we're looking at building ways to integrate it to integrate into Azure to allow a user of Premiere Pro to use the power of Azure basically to do all the things they need to do, so that you're not essentially doing it on the local machine. You're using all the processing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we're looking at building integrations for. I'm using the Adobe Creative Stack because that's the first thing that comes to mind that we are looking at, but we're looking at building integrations that punt all of the processing that needs to be done for whatever asset it is you're using to Azure. So it's a very interesting way for us to just kind of expand, expand the way that Azure gets used. We've already deployed a few solutions on top of Azure around provisioning access to content, magazine content. So we've built an entitlement server that sits on top of Azure, and you basically provision the access to a mobile device to magazine content, as an example.
Excellent. Yeah, while you were chatting, I threw up a slide just to sort of, one of the conversations I always get into, I'm constantly asked, like, just tell me more about Azure. And it's like, well, how much time do you have?
How do you guys pronounce it, first of all?
Right.
Because I hear Azure and Azure.
Everybody's a little different, so you pronounce it the way you want, as long as you have a credit card available.
Yeah.
I'm okay with either. Yeah, it really does break down into a number of functional areas, whether you're talking about platform services or infrastructure, or even data infrastructure. And I'll hop back to the sort of the data map here in a minute. But then there's a number of features and services under that. So it really starts becoming, what is it that you want to do? And that starts breaking down the conversation of like what areas functionally you're really talking about and dealing with. And they more and more they cross over. Obviously they're sort of blocked out here, but there's so many places where media crosses over with machine learning, and obviously storage and compute all break down in these areas. The example that we've been talking about for the last month or so, and Caleb, you were involved in some of these conversations, was being able to take content that's being ingested, pull the audio out, convert it into indexable text files. So giving you sort of immediately two options. You can make that indexable and then advertise against keywords, whether it's a pop-up ad or make that the breakpoint for an interstitial. But then also language services, being able to then immediately translate that and feed it back in as translated closed captions within the video, even to the point I believe you guys were working on some audible closed caption as well, using the computer voice, compute to speak when you get to parts of it. And that's all super compelling stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to go into the upstream part for publishers. I mean, there's some other stuff. A lot of this has come out of Microsoft research, and so we can't take credit for stitching it together into something useful. But there's the other stuff like being able to detect dodgy content like nudity I think they even have a racy category. So not quite nudity, but.
There's a set of APIs really called Project Oxford that are out there now, and it's all available for pre-release right now. So it's all preview, and people can go play with it for free. But yeah, it uses basically calculations to detect the people that are in the scene and the amount of clothes. So there's actually a formula that it has, and you can see that value, and you can set that value as a developer or as a publisher. You can say, anything below or above this is out of par with what I want to see. So it could be as simple as just making sure that you have thumbnails that are family safe for content. You know, I know in the Xbox world, a lot of time gets spent on just that conversation of like, oh, that thumbnail doesn't work. And just being able to suddenly turn that into an automated process, it makes my life easier. So I hope that it makes your life easier too.
There's another great example too, that one of those APIs let us analyze an image and work out the color distribution and even like where the focal point of the image is.
Right.
So a lot of the time, developers like us, we're pulling down images from like a WordPress CMS or something like that.
Formatted for something else.
Yeah, and that image was editorially created for a whole bunch of platforms and that, but we want to display, we want to display the image in this way. We might want to be doing some sort of a, animation with that image, or we might wanting the classic, putting some text somewhere, so we can choose where to put the text, and we can choose like the contrast for that, rather than having to splash feathered backgrounds and things like that over it. It's just adding that extra smart to your user experience.
Right, and Corey in the keynote yesterday, Corey from Xbox sort of spoke to some of this, where all of this is stuff that's being done today, but it's all taking time because it's hands-on having to deal with it. And so the example he gave was the 2014 presentations they did. They had to have operationally, because of the way everything pulled together, they needed basically like 44 different versions of the video coming in because of the languages and other things that were coming in. And by the way, all those languages were being typed in real time for the captioning. And then next year, 1 year later, applying some of the Azure services that had come out, they were able to get that down to 4 mezzanine streams and automate the translation components of it, and make that just a much more simplified piece from the back end perspective. Operationally, that's the kind of benefit that you need to get out of these things in order to focus the time on the front end features. Sort of in the same vein of the cloud and what we've been talking about, if we could sort of maybe jump back to the publisher side. Ed, talk to us about the data that you need in order to drive a good user experience.
Yeah, we talked. It was touched upon, like content consumption, fueling recommendations. I think that's one angle. But taking kind of what we were just talking about a little bit further, one of the things we're experimenting with at CISO, it's like we talk about, quote unquote, mapping the comedy genome. With what we're trying to do with our content offering is kind of take the best of what's been, starting with, we're going to have the entire Monty Python catalog up-res into HD.
Cool.
Nice. And obviously,
tell me there's a snark algorithm that's in here somewhere.
This is what I'm hoping you can help me out with.
Yeah, I want it.
And so, it's like, if you're a fan of comedy, it's like everything sort of fell in line from Python. And so it's like we've got, again, sort of the best of what's already been, and that gives way to people that we think are up and coming and are people that you might be interested in. And so when we talk about mapping the comedy genome, it's like we want to connect those dots. It's like, how did Python give way to SNL, which gave way to the Upright Citizens Brigade, which gave way to this, that, or the other. So when we talk about data, and specifically metadata, it's like, how can we kind of double down on what has already been done and create this experience for the user? It's like if sort of Netflix and Hulu are kind of like the great department stores of video, like the Targets of the world, it's like we aspire to be like your local record store, where you come in and somebody that knows your taste can sort of say, you know what, you may not have ever heard of this, and an algorithm may never generate it for you, but check this out. And so for us, I think that's the next evolution. How we do that, no clue. We're figuring it out. But to know that you guys are sort of creating those tools is tremendous. So
I'll go back to the blue slide, and you can just start pointing at things on the screen, and I'll help connect you to the right guys.
That's perfect.
I know a guy who knows a guy. Chris, the data story from Machinima's perspective.
Yeah, it's really about. Again, I keep going back to like relevancy and making those recommendations, and I think Calum had his point was great. Figuring out when somebody consumes and sits down, because again, to your earlier point, like our Machinima's target demo is really almost exclusively millennials, right? So like, again, it's that ubiquity, being able to sort of, interact with the user at that time. So the other thing, obviously, when you are dealing with a scale like Machinima's, we have upwards of 25 or 20,000 channels in varying sort of degrees of quality and volume and everything else. Navigating that requires
intense
hive mind. It requires Skynet to sort of put the right stuff in front of you, and yeah. So I mean, I think that's where we stand to benefit the most with using Azure. Is really just managing the scale and the volume of content.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Skynet. I think. Thanks. Yeah. Absolutely.
Skynet.
One day the computers are just going to decide that it's much easier if they don't have to deliver us any content.
Yeah. Exactly. They're just going to be sick of it all.
That's the side of it. So from the developer's perspective, Vlad, what's the data that the publishers have been asking you about? What is like the minimum bar that they know they need when you think about the either analytics side of it or the metadata that's feeding it? Where does that fall down from your perspective?
The only way I know how to answer that question is from the following perspective. So the data that our publishers are looking at is simply around distribution of devices in the marketplace and usage of those devices. I have yet to meet a publisher that has a list where the devices are prioritized, and item number one is you choose the device, a tablet application of some kind for whatever OS version you want to call.
It's probably an iPhone, but I know you're being polite.
Right, I'm trying to be very nice here. So I have yet to meet a publisher that looks at that list and goes, because of these other data points that aren't quite mapping to what we hope they do, we're not going to build an iOS app.
Yep.
Generally, they're going to build an iOS app.
Sure.
Doesn't even matter if the other data points don't map to where they think it should be. So from my perspective, it's all around device adoption and device usage. And even then, publishers just know that there's a certain set of devices that they have to be on, period. And then all this other stuff, analytics and how you serve up ads and the data that you use to, all that stuff comes into play. But for us, we see the first step always being that list, and then figuring out what they build. And in general, it's going to be the top 1, 2, or 3 devices they're going to build any way you cut it.
Right. Caleb, what's the data conversations you have with your partners?
So I would probably make a generalized statement that I think
you're on a panel. That's what we're here for.
Most of our clients tend to over-instrument their apps.
Sure.
I think more and more they're collecting more data. I don't think we have any single publisher who's just using one analytics package, for example. They're all using 3, maybe 4. And I don't believe it's getting utilized.
Right. So there's this perception that they need that, but then whether they actually use it, it's kind of like when you go to buy a car and you get upsold on some features maybe, or you feel like you've got to have that thing, but is it more important maybe just to get the app out there first?
I think so. I think maybe what's driving it, and I was having a good discussion with Jim this morning about it, is that it's probably like ad ops are saying, okay, well, we need to have Nielsen in there, and production wants Conviva in there, and then somebody else. And so I think there's no shortage of data being captured by the publishers at the moment, but unless you're using it all intelligently, I'm starting to make the argument that you should put this all back in the cloud and let machine learning do the work for you, because
business intelligence, BI, is the whole area of creating dashboards to parse that data.
Yeah.
So, Ed, so that's an interesting question for you. Do you have a list of people? Do you have a list of analytics that all the various teams come to you and it's like, we must have this or you can't build your app?
No, that doesn't happen. No, it's...
Give it time.
Yeah.
Talk to me next week.
Yeah, no, it's, of course. I mean, I think that and it all comes from, everybody wants to find that edge, and it's like you never want to be caught in a situation where there could be really relevant, actionable data that you can move on to better your business. But to Calem's point, I think there's a handful that really drive the needle without question. And Vlad mentioned distribution. I think that getting on as many devices as possible is going to do more to sort of drive adoption faster than anything else. As it relates to analytics, yeah, it's like I love analytics just because I think it's fun, to play with those numbers. But it's like it is such a rabbit hole if you allow it to be.
Right.
And so as for day-to-day management of the business, yeah, it's like there's a handful I think of analytics that really matter. And for the most part, yeah, maybe
Again,
overkill.
it kind of comes back to being actionable. You can't just have it, just like we talked about on the client side, the actionable instances of this is, great that we've got it, but why do we have it and what are we going to do with it?
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. We're very close on time. We've got about 10 minutes left. Are there some questions in the audience? We do have a microphone that can be passed around, so if someone's got a question, raise a hand and we can get someone over to talk to you. Nope. Yes, sir. You've got a mic coming up right behind you.
Is the notification stuff an API, or is it something that you need to use Microsoft SDK for?
It is an API-driven service, and I mean for sure from our perspective. I guess by default it's kind of just there and it's part of the platform, and so apps will be able to trigger things. Where you start getting into some of the API work is making those actionable and doing something with it, because then presumably you're having to tie the app back to either the local host version of the app or to the cloud where some account settings are synced and utilized. So it's a little bit of both, but so far my understanding of it's been fairly minimal in the amount of work that it takes to start developing something. Again, even just for the basic sort of discovery or notification area of it. Other questions? Other comments? No? Well, all right. I've got my last question then that I'm gonna softball out here for the guys. I wanted to make it easy on them because I didn't want to. In terms of when we're talking about over-the-top content here, and the media apps that we have, based on where we are in the ecosystem, everything has started to fragment. We've got multiple business services. I can get it ad-related. I can put down my credit card and get ad-free subscriptions, all the varieties that are there. Who's our winner in this new ecosystem? Is it the publisher? Is it the person watching it? Is it the advertisers sitting back there with their giant bank accounts trying to figure out how to make money on all this? Who's the winner from your perspective, Chris?
Hard to say. I think ultimately, from the Machinima perspective, I think you have to strike a balance between the viewer and the content creators, and just putting those people together. You sort of net two different winners, right? But
let me ask
ultimately
you this from your side of things, particularly because Machinima is such niche audience.
Yeah.
Would this have existed, 8 years ago, 10 years ago? Was there the ability to reach the specific gamer audience that you wanted to? Was that something that would even be possible, or has it been improved through the sort of the fragmentation of things?
Certainly it's improved, but you have to remember, like, my audience is, Machinima's audience is generally pretty savvy.
Yep.
Very, and again, these guys were born with an iPhone in their hands, so there was never a back when.
Right.
These guys were born from exactly these device form factors. So.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, in that respect, it's kind of an easy one for Machinima.
Caleb, what about you? Where's your head on the winner conversation?
I should be saying the user, shouldn't I? But I'm going to say the advertisers.
Yeah.
I think.
Is it the opportunities are just wider now? Or?
I think so, and the targeting.
Yeah.
Right.
Is key for them, and
I don't know if they trust it yet, though. That's the one, and that's been many of the conversations here. Is that they've been presented with all these, but I don't know that they necessarily believe it yet. And so that's the next hurdle, is convincing them. Vlad, what about you?
I think this question is probably an hour debate in itself.
Yeah.
So I think
Not good enough. Answer again.
Yeah, no, I'll answer. I think every one of the actors that you mentioned in this space, they've both won and they've lost at the same time.
What is the trade-off?
Well, I just think in terms of the publishers, I actually feel bad for them because they've got, I don't know how many various devices they have to support. And it's an investment any way you cut it. They have to invest in absolutely everything to make sure they capture as much of the audience as possible. Whereas long ago, being the technology neophyte hat, putting that on, television was it.
Right.
One channel, simple. With users, it's great. They have lots of choice, lots of options. But in that also comes the danger of having too much option, right? So how do you get to the content? How do you get to the things that matter to you? And all these things that we've been talking about, recommendation engines, the smarts associated to the cloud and all that stuff comes into play to try to make life easier. But again, I think it's a win and loss. I think your point about the advertisers is, I would agree that they have won, I would say more so than lost in that argument. But again, on the user and the publisher side, I think it's a double-edged sword.
Interesting. Ed, what about you? Where's your head?
Yeah, it's I agree with kind of everything that's been said. I think honestly, cloud providers are poised pretty well. Because
Satya,
yeah,
it worked.
Because from the publisher perspective, it's true. It's like the competition is it's already crowded out there, and it's only going to get more crowded. And I think that does serve end users and viewers very well. I think everybody would say I would prefer to have more options than fewer. But it's still, again, it's like it can just get cluttered and tough. And so I think that the infrastructure providers that are actually enabling all of this growth, empowering it, poised to do the best in the short term, seems to me.
There was an article I read just before coming in here, and again, numbers can be fudged, I know, but it was an article on Engadget, and they were talking about Ericsson's estimating that until 2021, there's going to be 55% growth per year of mobile viewing of content. That number might be 20%, might be 25%. Whatever the actual is, it's still a lot. Right. And if you're thinking of that year-over-year growth, that's a lot of growth. And the article went on to explain that T-Mobile, as an example, now has a plan for subscribers that want to binge watch. So it's specifically targeted at binge watchers of content. They've put a plan together. So it's just a sign of the times. Companies are adjusting, users and viewers are adjusting. Everything's kind of trying to find its natural shape now.
Excellent. Interesting. Cool. Well, listen, guys, thanks so much for taking time to be here. Thanks to you who are in the audience. If there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and kind of wrap things up. We're all going to be around, so if you do have a question and you want to approach these guys, they're all perfectly approachable, and none of them have hit or bitten me to date, so I think you're safe chatting with them. So thanks again for attending, and maybe a round of applause for these guys for taking the time.